This is Destination Unlocked with me, Daniel Edward.
Dismount, ready to depart.
Please make sure your seatbelt is not fastened and do make yourself comfortable.
Welcome to this episode of Destination Unlocked, where we are heading to Tenerife. Destination Unlocked is the conversational travel podcast where every week I'm joined by a local or a travel expert who introduces us to their part of the world and gives us everything we need to know for a fantastic trip. And today we're going to the Canary Island of Tenerife with John Reid, who has just retired as a private tour guide. He's also written a few books, which we'll chat about within the conversation. If you're heading out to Tenerife, it's a fabulous island. You're going to really love it, and this is going to set you up for great success there. Enjoy. So, John, where are you unlocking for us today?
I'm unlocking the Canary Island of Tenerife.
And it's a place that I absolutely love. It was one of my first international holidays, and I remember my dad saying to me, either on the plane or when we just arrived, you know, when this place erupts, it's going to send a tsunami so big that it's going to flood the east coast of the United States. And I was terrified for the whole time.
Well, we do live in a volcanic hotspot, so we know that at some point or another, we'll probably have another eruption. We did have one major one on the island of La Palma in 2021, which lasted for 90 days. But that doesn't mean you have to listen to all the newspapers and threats saying that it's going to blow up, because we get plenty of warning, and I doubt very much or anything will happen for a long time, especially on Tenerife.
Especially on Tenerife, there's confidence there.
Having said that, we do get rumblings here and there, but we still live here and there's no panic, so don't worry about that.
Nothing wrong with a rumble every now and then. What would you say are the main highlights of Tenerife that people who are planning a trip there just absolutely must have on their itinerary?
Well, we have just talked about possible volcanic eruptions, and of course, the must in Tenerife has to be Teide National Park. Not necessarily climbing up Mount Teide, which is a stunning experience, but actually visiting the park itself, because Tenerife is like a miniature continent with such a variety of landscapes. But of course, when you get up to the central highlands, what we call the alpine deserts of Las Cañadas, you could be on different planets rather than just a miniature continent. So it's a stunning place, which I would always recommend just for a peep and then to quickly get out of it, because it does get rather full of people. However, there are other places like the Anaga Mountains, which is my favorite area, possibly because of the lush subtropical rainforests that we have at the top of the mountains. Very different to where most of the holidaymakers go, which is the south of Tenerife, you know, Adeje, Los Cristianos, Las Americas, etc., which is more like a desert that's been greened artificially for the massive tourist resorts.
And you talk about massive tourist resorts. I would imagine that a lot of people are going to Tenerife and they are just basing themselves in a massive tourist resort, and in some ways they wouldn't even know where they are.
I think the majority just do that. I mean, understandably, you know, coming down from the cold north, the winter months in Scandinavia, England, etc. That's what they want. They just want to lie by the pool or on the beach and get some sun on themselves. But more and more people are becoming more adventurous and actually going around and driving themselves or getting guides like myself to show them something completely different, because Tenerife is an amazing place. As I say, it's not just sun and tourism and beaches.
What sort of adventures do people like to go out on?
Well, there's very big stuff in kayaking. There's a lot of hiking. I do a lot of hiking. Of course, there's climbing Mount Teide. There's paragliding. It's become a very popular event. Paragliding experts will take people on rides from high up in the mountains near the observatory, which is at 3,200 meters above sea level. And literally they fly through the clouds and land on the beaches in the north of Tenerife. So that is a stunning experience. Fishing, of course, and going out to see the whales and dolphins, for which I feel quite sorry, actually, but there we go.
So you mentioned the north. There's an obvious north and south divide in Tenerife. There's a big mountain in the middle of it, or a volcano in the middle of it, but they do feel quite different. How would you choose one over the other?
Well, the south is evidently where most of the big five-star hotels have been erected, where most of the tourism goes, because it is drier and it gets more sunlight, and so it's more of a desert. Whereas on the north side of the mountains, northeast side of the mountains, the air gets stuck by the high mountains, which prevent the air from going right over them. And so that causes condensation on the north side of the island. So we have much more cloud cover. And if we do get some rain, more rain. And therefore the north is much prettier much greener, much lusher, more vegetation, more gardens, more vineyards, banana plantations. One side's dry and barren, the other side is green and lush. That's always my description.
That's the trade winds, isn't it?
The trade winds, exactly. The trade winds, which is what really got tourism going here in the Canaries 400 or 500 years ago. Tourism didn't start in the 19th, 20th century. It started long before that. For example, if you went to the port of Santa Cruz, which is the capital, there's a walkway between the yachting marina and the cruise ship port, which is the walkway of the illustrious visitors. And along there are bollards with the names and kind of images of all these visitors who began to come here from right back from the 16th century through to modern days. People like James Cook, for example, Captain James Cook, who on his last voyage of discovery stopped off in Tenerife in 1776, spent a week here. Then you've got Charles Darwin, although he wasn't allowed off the ship. He stopped off in Tenerife on his voyage in 1843.
Why didn't he make the cut? Why wasn't he allowed off?
Well, it wasn't his fault. A boat rowed out from the beach and literally said, nobody's allowed off the ship. This ship is in quarantine because earlier ships coming from the United Kingdom had reported an outbreak of cholera in England. So they didn't want to take the risk.
It makes perfect sense.
So Darwin, in his diaries, said how very disappointed he was not to have explored Tenerife.
If I was stuck on one of those little ships and just looking at it, I'd be disappointed too.
Well, exactly.
What about the capital? It's unusual in that the tourist centre is not there. Is there a reason for that, or should people make the effort to go and spend a day or so in the capital?
The capital has a lot going for it. It's quite a big city, 240,000 inhabitants. It's a massive cruise ship port now, of course. Why don't tourists go there? A few tourists go there. There's some, first-class hotels there. But there's no beach. The beach has been overtaken by the port. It's not what tourists want, unless you want to discover the historical nature of the island. And there's a lot of history in the city centre. There's, of course, the famous Sydney-esque opera house that we have by the sea. There's one or two little fortresses. For example, the St. John the Baptist fortress that was completed in the 17th century, 1695, I think it was. And right next to it, you've got this modern auditorium, this modern opera house, which opened in 2003. The contrast between one and the other is amazing. So just that is worth a visit if you want to hire a car or take a drive up there. What most people don't know is that there's quite a lot of reference to the Battle of Santa Cruz, which took place in 1797. And that's when Horatio Nelson, Admiral Nelson, was asked by his commanding officer to go and raid Tenerife, to capture it. And of course, the Battle of Santa Cruz is where Horatio Nelson lost his arm, his right arm. And it's the only battle that he's believed to have lost.
Well, it certainly didn't go well for him.
No.
And one of the few battles where Britain lost against the Spanish in history.
I think you're right, yes, absolutely. He should easily have won that battle. In fact, Tenerife may well have been British had he or his captains, because he used to pay attention to what his captains said, not made some pretty disastrous errors of judgment in terms of the currents in the sea, the heat. It was a very hot day, the way they attacked using similar, very successful methods that he'd used in the Mediterranean to capture city-states. But he got it completely wrong in Tenerife.
You say Tenerife may well have been British. I feel like some locals say that Tenerife is already a bit British and maybe there are too many of us going over.
Well, it depends who you listen to. I've heard people saying, gosh, if only Nelson had succeeded. But of course, you're trying to get me to talk about what we are calling over-tourism. And yes, indeed, we have over-tourism in Tenerife, as it happens throughout the world. But we in Tenerife especially have certainly got over-tourism. And I say this as a guide. I'm an official guide in Tenerife. And of course, I live in tourism. But I must admit, there's too much. We are all worried about this because it has affected ordinary people. It's affected the island, infrastructures and also the environment on the island. But most of the people realize that, it's not the tourists' fault. They're not really complaining about the tourists. They're not complaining against the tourists. They're not protesting against tourists. They're actually protesting against the government for permitting the construction and building of so many hotels and so many apartment blocks, etc., etc. It's not the tourist's fault. It's a great place to come and stay and come and have a holiday. But a fine line has to be drawn, and it hasn't been drawn. And it's probably a bit late for it to be drawn.
Is there a season which is quieter to visit?
Yes. It's my favorite time of year, which is between the middle of April and the end of June. May and June are really good months to visit, especially if you're interested in flora, because everything's in flower. The island becomes a watercolor. especially high up in around Mount Teide, is where the endemic flora up there gives us such a show, especially plants like the Tower of Jewels or the Echiumville Pretty, which is a stunning, stunning plant. Also September and the beginning of October, but May and June are definitely the quietest time and the prettiest.
What's the food scene like in Tenerife? Is it very Spanish or does it feel quite uniquely Tenerifian?
There's a great mix here. There's obviously Spanish. We're lucky to have a bit of all, a bit of everything. So imagine if you were in Galicia or Cantabria, where there's some wonderful spoon dishes, lovely stews and things like that. We have a bit of that. We've also got the Mediterranean diet as well. But of course, intermingled there is also what we inherited from North Africa, from the pre-Hispanic inhabitants, the Guanche inhabitants. They base their diet more on goat meat and goat milk and all that kind of. So there is an authentic Canary Island cuisine, which a lot of little restaurants are now developing into a more sort of nouveau Canary cuisine, and very, very good food. I can give you 2-3 examples. One is the typical grilled goat cheese with the typical mojos, the Canary Island sauces, and palm honey or palm syrup on top. That is absolutely amazing. Always stuns my guests when I take them to guachinches, which are very typical local restaurants. My favorite was probably grilled octopus. Poor octopus, but I mean, it's a delicious way to eat octopus. And obviously inherited from the North African population is goat meat stew. The most delicious meals or dishes are literally poor man's dishes. So in other words, things like ropa vieja, which means old clothes. And that is what, whatever you can find in the kitchen, you put in the pot. And the same with a wonderful soup or pottage, which is called Rancho Canario, Canary Island Rancho. And that again is a wonderful, filling, almost just one meal a day thing. It's absolutely delicious. Chickpeas, potatoes, beans, meat, macaronis, everything chopped in. Whatever's found in the kitchen.
It's the easiest way of cooking as well.
Absolutely.
And something which surprises people is the wine scene in Tenerife as well. People think, oh, surely you can't grow vines here, but you can, and the volcanic soils do, well, something rather special with it.
Yes, let's say local wine producers or vineyard owners are very proud of the fact that they can say, well, the minerals in the volcanic soil do wonders for the wine. But of course, we talk about the exquisite wines that we have today. And there are some very exquisite wines. We've got over 70 types of vine, and they do a lot of blending to produce exquisite wines, especially the whites and the rosés. But of course, people forget that the Canary Island wines became famous in the 16th century. William Shakespeare, in various of his plays, mentions Canary wines, Canary sack, Malmsey wines. We always talk about Madeira and its wines, but in fact, I believe that the British first started buying wines from the Canaries. And in the particular valley that I live, which is the Orotava Valley, was the first to export wines to Great Britain, or to England, let's say, in 1549. So there's a long history of wine production here.
Wow.
The history of agriculture here in Tenerife is stunning because it goes from one product to the other. I mean, the Canaries first started with sugarcane. That was all they had. So they sold sugar to begin with, then wine, then cochineal, and then bananas and tomatoes and other things. But I always joke about this when I explain to my clients that, of course, the main clients for the Canary Island wine, possibly because the main clients for anything alcoholic were the British.
It's good to have a loyal customer.
But of course, it's not just a matter of drinking it. It's the knowledge that selling wine was very beneficial to their pockets. It's a very lucrative business.
Oh, yeah, I think it was business decisions. It wasn't consumption decisions. It was wanting to sell it on.
Absolutely.
How do people get around the island? If you're going to base yourself, let's say in the south, you've decided you're going for a resort holiday, but you don't want to be stuck at the resort the whole time. A couple of days of the beach is great, but now you want to get into the island and see it. How do you do that?
We're very lucky because the public transport service is very good indeed. I mean, if you get the timetables and you get the connections, the buses are very, very on time. They're frequent. You can get anywhere you like, even to the smallest villages up in the Anaga Mountains, if you get the right connections. Obviously, if you're a tourist or a visitor, there's lots of rental car companies renting their cars, so you can get a car quite easily. Having said that, in the peak seasons, you have to book well in advance because they do run out and the prices go sky high.
Is it safe to drive if you're not used to it?
It's safe to drive, but some of the road signs and roundabouts are a bit confusing. especially if you're from the British Isles and driving on the correct side of the road.
I agree with you.
And there are a lot of narrow roads as well. So up in the mountains, very windy, narrow roads. I've noticed as a driver myself, because I do drive my clients around, that you get a lot of people maybe from the British Isles finding it rather dodgy driving along those roads. But I've never seen many accidents.
That's at least a good thing. But is there an etiquette in terms of when you're on one of these narrow winding roads as to who gives way to who?
Not necessarily, no, there isn't. The only thing is that normally a car coming down a hill, for example, down one of the narrow roads, will have to give preference to the car coming up.
Which is always a
But
good
that's
idea.
the only thing. It's always a good idea.
Yeah.
It's always a good idea.
And of course, the other way to see the place is to take a private tour.
Yes, of course, which I thoroughly enjoy because it's a lovely place to drive around, lovely place to show. I like showing off my island. I know quite a lot about the island. My family been here for more than 200 years. I do private tours, only private tours.
And this is something I really like about what you do. And your company is called Tenerife Private Tours, so it sort of gives the game away. But you only do a private tour, not one of these big group tours, which can often end up a big coach lurching through Teide Mountain. And by the end of it, they feel thoroughly sick and they have a few pictures out of the coach window. Yes. You've gone for a totally different focus. And why does it work?
Well, let's start by saying why I did that. And why I did that is because actually I started on the coaches as a guide. I'd just have the microphone and do my spiel. But I felt very sorry for the passengers. Because I was always telling them to get on and get off and get on and get off. And 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And also, I prefer a one-to-one basis. I prefer a personal basis. I realize that I like meeting people. I like making friends with my clients. And luckily, I've been very lucky with that. I've got a lot of friends who have been clients, past clients, and a lot of repeat clients as well. And so it's much more enjoyable, much more enjoyable. And of course, we can stop, we can go off the beaten track. We can do more sort of personalized tours. I much more enjoy meeting people. It's not just a job, it's actually meeting people. That's the kick I get out of it, is meeting people.
If somebody's thinking about taking a private tour, do they have to do a lot more research in advance to then ask the right questions to get the right tour? Or do you suggest things to them?
A little bit of both. My website offers a number of tours, a variety of tours. You can't see the island in one day. You've got to be more specific. Some of these coach tours, they will rush you through different parts of the island. You hardly know what you're seeing. I've divided up the island into 6 or 7 tours, and I do it at a leisurely pace. I get a lot of clients who obviously do their homework and do their studies, and they ask me some wonderful questions. I love this one-to-one. I love being asked questions during the ride, during the tour, and it's great fun. It's great fun.
So what was your background in order to get into tour guiding at all? Because you have to know a huge amount of, well, everything really.
Well, I started guiding only about 15 years ago. Before that, I did a lot of other things. I was in the UK, spent a bit of time in the British services. I was a late student. I've written books. And really, it just came naturally. A friend of mine saying, John, if you get your official guide's certificate or license, you can come on my buses. And so I thought, well, I took his word for it. So I did the exams, I did the studying, did the exams. You have to study quite hard to become a guide. The exams are not easy. And once I got my license, then I started guiding. But the background, I suppose, my family having been here for 200 years, a lot of information handed down over the years. My family, there are 4 generations of vice consulates in Tenerife. So, a lot of background knowledge anyway. And as my friend said, when I asked him, a guide, me, why? I mean, I hadn't thought about being a guide. And he said, well, John, you know a little bit and you talk rather a lot. I didn't quite know how to take that, but I understand that one needs to talk to be a guide.
A silent guide isn't the most informative.
No.
If people want to find out more about your books, what is the website that they can go to?
I've got a historical blog, which is called Travel Stories in Tenerife and the Canary Islands. I'm sure you'd like that, actually.
I did.
And
I read
it
it.
talks about. Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Well, there's lots of interesting articles on that over the years, which gives you an insight into the past of Tenerife, let's say, more than the present. And that can be found online as well. It's just basically, if you Google travel stories in Tenerife and the Canary Islands, you'll find it. And my books are on there as well. So you can always click on the book cover images and you'll be taken to Amazon.
I really like that blog because for me, to see a place with context helps me really see a place. I'm not a beach person. Anybody who knows me knows that I can't do an hour on a beach. It just doesn't suit me. And so to get into the history of it, to get into the stories of how it ended up as it is today, you need to understand how it was to then get
absolutely.
there. That's why I love the
Absolutely.
agriculture story of Tenerife. I like the military story of Tenerife.
Yeah.
I'm not such a fan of
yeah.
beaches myself.
No. But quite honestly, Canary Islanders never went to the beach. They didn't used to go swimming. They didn't go into the rock pools until the Victorian visitors from the United Kingdom started to come. And there are old black and white photographs of, Victorian ladies in their long dresses and petticoats, rolling them up and paddling in the rock pools in Puerto de la Cruz. The local people were amazed. What are these people doing?
That is so funny. Imported customs. Because the
Imported
Victorians loved the seaside. I mean, if you look at all
Absolutely.
of the British holiday
Yeah.
areas, it's
Yeah.
all Victorian seaside spots.
There are beaches that are called Playa del Inglés, for example, Englishman's Beach. There are rock pools, La Charca de la Coronela, the colonel's wife's rock pool, where an English colonel's wife used to paddle, used to go into the rock pool. And there's another one near the town of Garachico, northwest of the island, which is called El Charco del Inglés, Englishman's Pond, a rock pool, because of an Englishman there who used to manage a sugarcane plantation, who used to every day ride on his camel down to the rock pool for a dip in the rock pool. An Englishman, eccentric. We were all very eccentric. We still are.
I think that is our international reputation, yeah.
Yeah, it is. But we've done a lot of good with our eccentricities and our ways and our manners.
We seem to pop up all over the world with the odd bits and bobs.
We don't realize how much good we've done, actually. We're terribly critical of ourselves, but we've done a lot of good. We should be very proud of what we've done around the world, quite honestly.
Yeah, and that's nice to hear because that is not right now the mainstream narrative. And I've been reading a book, I've forgotten the title of it. It's about the British Empire, but it's been told from a very positive perspective. For all the people are saying about empire, and maybe you wouldn't have an empire today, that doesn't mean that it wasn't contributing in its time. And that's sort of being unwritten at this point because of the negative aspects of it as well. But in 100, 200, 300 years' time, people are going to be criticizing what we're doing today.
Exactly. But I mean, we do have a tendency to beat ourselves down to the ground. We're terribly self-critical and ashamed, and we shouldn't be. We, quite honestly, okay, we've done some naughty things, but we've done a lot more good.
Yeah, most of the train lines in the world. If somebody's making their way to Tenerife and they've not been before, how easy is it for them to get around with English if they don't have any Spanish?
It's very easy. Most Canary Island people learn a little bit of English anyway now. So most people in the bars, restaurants, etc., will know some English, and they'll love to show it off. But even if they don't speak English, you go up into the hills, you go to a local inn or a local shop or whatever, just using your hands and arms and things like that. People get along in any languages. And of course, the Canary Islanders, they're very generous, open people, especially the older ones, so no problems there at all. Very, very, very welcoming people. Possibly because the Canary Islanders, being where they are in the Atlantic, so strategically placed, over the years, so many people have come and gone this way, on their way somewhere, that the Canary Islanders became used to welcoming people and being generous and offering them what they had, So they're very, very, very good people.
Are there Tenerifisms to Spanish in the same way that in South America the Spanish is slightly different?
Yes, quite a lot. It's similar to South America. I mean, the accent is different. The grammar is all the same. Grammatically, everything's the same, but the accents, yes. So there are lots of examples. For example, if you were in Madrid and you said thank you, you'd say gracias. In Tenerife, you say gracias. You pronounce the C as a C rather than a TH. And also, the word endings are very lazy. We don't end our words.
How about adios then? Do you say adios?
Adios, adios. Like an H at the end, adios.
And hello is still hola?
Yeah, hello is hola. Hola. Yeah.
Please, por favor, there's a soft ending anyway, I suppose.
Well, por favor. Por favor is the same as it would be anyway, por favor.
Okay, so a few easy words and you...
Words, yeah. And of course, there are also words that come from English, old words from English. For example, the word gambollero comes from come by on board. It's when the merchant ships from England would arrive in, talking about 300-400 years ago, would come and anchor offshore or even in the port and, sort of invite people to come on board and buy without declaring anything. Bit of a naughty kind of selling and buying. Come buy on board. And we talk about that quietly, that kind of thing. And the other one, of course, the famous one is the word guachinche. Guachinche sounds as if it should come from the pre-Hispanic Guanche tribes, but Guachinche is the name of a typical kind of very local homemade food restaurant, of which there are lots more now than there used to be. And Guachinche comes from an Old English or Irish expression, which is, I am watching ye. I'm watching ye. In other words, I'm watching ye, I'm watching what you're doing, because it was when the British or English merchants would come to Tenerife to buy wine in the 16th, 17th century. And so I'm watching that you don't actually water it down or whatever. And of course, the
Sometimes you
local
need to do that in a
wine,
fuel station too.
the local wine maker would invite the foreign merchant to come and sample his wines while having a meal at his house.
That's hospitality. Wow.
So that's how they became restaurants. Hospitality, yeah.
Where is somewhere that only locals go in Tenerife?
Well, gosh, that's a difficult question. That is a very difficult question. Very difficult to find anywhere in Tenerife that you will only find locals at. But I can tell you that if you were to go into the Anaga Mountains and go deep into one of the valleys, you would come across little villages like Chinamada or Las Carboneras. And when you walk or drive through there, you will be amazed to find that there's hardly any tourism. A lot of my guests, when they choose that particular tour, they're amazed. They say, gosh, there's no tour buses, there's no tour coaches. What do people live from here? And of course, what they see around them is terraces and terraces and terraces of potatoes, of pumpkin, vineyards, etc., things like that. So deep in the Anaga Mountains, off the beaten track, you will find only locals. But you will also find hikers from all over the world who've discovered these places.
Back into the main tourist areas, what do people do about tips in Tenerife? Is tipping a thing?
That's usually a question I get from my American guests. What I always say to them is, if you're happy with the service and you're happy with the food, be generous, especially up in the mountains, not down in the tourist areas. Everybody's making a good profit. So I always say, if you're happy, just leave 10% or even less. But it's not obligatory. If you don't leave a tip, that's perfectly all right. Generally speaking, for example, if I go out on a meal, if we pay something like 30 euros between my wife and I or whatever, I don't leave more than 2 euros, something like that. Just a couple of coins. If you're up in the hills in one of the local guachinche type restaurants, where obviously food is very, very cheap, I'm more generous. I leave more because I'm helping a family that lives up there.
And if you're going out of the main tourist areas, do you need cash?
Most places will accept card. Very few places won't. Having said that, one of my favorite restaurants, which is in the town called Garachico in the northwest, wonderful restaurant, they don't accept card. So it's worth taking a little bit of cash just in case.
And it's euros, so easy to get hold of.
Yeah, easy to get hold of. Yeah.
If somebody's visiting from a cruise ship, because you mentioned the cruise port in Santa Cruz earlier, what would you say is the best day trip for them to make the most of their time? Because chances are they have a day. Maybe they've got a 7.5, 8 hour stop.
Right. There are places to avoid. In other words, the other extreme of the island. The cruise ship port is in the northeast. So try and avoid tours that are going to take you to places like Masca, for example, which is the extreme southwest of the island. The rest is okay. Having said that, the traffic jams on the main highways in Tenerife have become horrendous, especially in the early mornings and from 3 o'clock onwards. So you have to be very, very careful if you're on a cruise ship, especially if you're doing a private tour, that you're going to get back on time. So I always recommend, if you're on a cruise, it depends what you want to see. But if you're not bothered about going to see Teide National Park or what I call the scenic Northwest, Garachico and Icod, if you're not bothered about that, but you just want to see a little bit of Tenerife, take in a bit of the sort of old Tenerife that I call it, then I would always go for something like the Taganana tour, which is in the Anaga Mountains, the Chinamada tour, which is also down in the Anaga Mountains as well. So the closer the better. But most sort of organized cruise ship tours will take people to Teide National Park. They'll take people to Laurel Parque, which is a big nature park in the Orotava Valley. They'll take you to Garachico and Icod. They'll take you to Puerto de la Cruz or La Orotava. La Orotava is a wonderful old historical town, actually, if you can go and visit the town centre there. Cruise ship passengers are finding it more difficult because of the traffic. So don't be too daring and go too far away.
Or you might be staying longer than you thought.
Yes.
The wrap-up roundup quickfire finish is now ready for boarding.
What would you say is the top thing to see or do on Tenerife?
Well, obviously, Teide National Park. You can get more out of it by enjoying the whole park, by going to the different geological sites in the park. You can go to the top, but you've also, especially if you're on a cruise ship, you've got to be very, very careful of the time, because sometimes you spend longer at the top than you would imagine. And also, only 200 people per day are permitted to the summit. So you can go up into the cable car, which will take you to about 200 meters below the summit, but you can't go to the top unless you have special permission. There's usually a waiting list for that special permission. You've got to get it 3 months in advance. You've got to get your guide, or you do it yourself to get permission 3 months in advance, because the last bit is not only a 60-degree gradient climb, it's a thrilling climb. It's quite strenuous, so you've got to be fit, you've got to have no heart problems, that kind of thing. And the views at the top obviously are stunning, but I think you can get much more from actually visiting the different points within Teide National Park.
What would you say is a tourist trap to avoid?
Masca, the Valley of Masca. It's just become saturated. Well, Teide National Park has become saturated as well. If you were to come in the months that I mentioned, in other words, May, June, September, then you'd be fine. But any other time of year, you've got 2 areas of Tenerife which have become ridiculously overcrowded with rental cars, with tour buses, etc. And that is, I'm afraid, Teide National Park and the Valley of Masca.
You've preempted the next question, which is, what's your favourite time of year to visit?
Well, there you go. Well, as I'm here all year round, I really don't mind. But in terms of the job I do, which is to be a private guide, my favorite time of year is May, June. Everything's in flower. The weather's not too hot. It hasn't become summer yet. It still has a bit of, nice feeling to it. Very clear skies, a lot of nature. Very nice time of year.
What's your top book or film recommendation that would connect people to Tenerife?
Well, there's been a lot of movies made here in Tenerife, as you probably know. The last Jason Bourne movie was almost entirely filmed in Santa Cruz. One of the Fast and Furious movies, which my sons used to enjoy, was filmed partly here. Probably the most famous movie was one called A Million Years BC. And now you're far too young to remember that, but A Million Years BC in 1964 with Raquel Welch.
I will look it up.
Of course, there are other interesting books. There's one which is called The Invention of Nature, and it's written by an American lady called Andrea Wolff, who wrote about the life of the great German explorer Alexander von Humboldt. And of course, he spent a few days here in Tenerife. And of course, she mentioned his stay here. And it gives a lot of interesting aspects about not only the history, but also the plants and the flora and the nature, etc. And then you've got John Sugden's 2 huge volumes about the life of Admiral Nelson. And in it, there's 2 long chapters dedicated to the Battle of Santa Cruz. So that's quite interesting to read as well. And of course, there are little books like this one, The Skipping Virgin and Other Tale, which is full of 22 very, very short stories, all based here in Tenerife. And of course, it's mine.
You can get that on Amazon.
You can, yes, you can.
What's your top food or drink to try?
My favorite food is almost certainly rabbit stew in salmorejo sauce with wrinkled potatoes. Salmorejo sauce is a very spicy sauce with all sorts of things in it, apart from lots and lots of garlic and pepper and salt, paprika, chili peppers, all that. It's very, very good. It's a dish that marinates for at least 2 or 3 days. It's wonderful. I'm feeling hungry already, just because I've mentioned that. As far as wines are concerned, there are lots of very, very good wine producers here. So I could recommend any kind of white or even red from the Taganana vineyard, the Taganana, which is spelled Taganasti, the Suertes el Marqués. Very good vineyards here. Very good vineyards.
My final question is, if I want to go home with a local, authentic souvenir, not a fridge magnet or a cap made in China, what could I get?
I'm not a souvenir seeker, but I would go for something, not a souvenir. I mean, souvenirs, as you say, are something you stick on the postcard or whatever. I would go for something like a handmade, authentic basket. weaved basket from one of the local producers, of which there are few and far between now. I would also go for a local cheese. Obviously, that's not a souvenir, so you're going to consume it. But the local goat cheeses are absolutely first class.
It sounds like something good for me to take home. I love goat's cheese. John Reid from Tenerife Private Tours, thank you so much for unlocking Tenerife for us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Once again, thank you very much to John Reid for unlocking Tenerife for us. And if you'd like to check out his book, give it a search on Amazon or Google and let me know what you think. You can always get in touch, and it's lovely to hear from you about all of your travels. If this was your first time listening to Destination Unlocked and you're not yet following, I'd say do that now, just before you go, so that whenever you want to find us again to go travelling somewhere else, you can get here nice and easily. Until then, have a great day. Bye-bye.